Sometimes, life changes in the span of a single humiliating second. On an ordinary Monday morning in Minneapolis, a woman in her late 30s walked across a plaza toward the first real job she'd had in years. She had survived a broken marriage, a lifetime of being underestimated, and more nights of doubt than she could count. All she wanted was a chance, one quiet chance to start over. And then the wind rose. A sharp, merciless gust that lifted her dress, exposed the one thing she prayed no one would see, and sent a familiar shame crashing back into her chest. She held the fabric down with shaking hands, cheeks burning as strangers stared. What she didn't know was that someone important had witnessed everything. And that moment, that painful, unwanted moment, would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could possibly imagine. Let me tell you the story, from the very beginning. The wind caught her before she even had a chance to breathe. Savannah Brooks had barely stepped off the city bus when a cold spring gust swept across the downtown plaza, the kind that funneled mercilessly between 40-story glass buildings and didn't care whose day it ruined. She pressed a hand over her chest to keep her coat from flapping open, but the wind had other plans. It tugged at her hem, sneaking under the thin fabric of her dress as if it had been waiting for her specifically. She quickened her steps, heels tapping too loudly on the stone tiles, the sound echoing around her like accusing knocks. First day, she reminded herself, just get inside, smile. Don't think about everything you left behind to be here. Ahead, the Morgan-Tech Tower rose like a wall of mirrored ice, sleek, perfect, unforgiving. Its revolving doors spun in an endless loop as people in tailored suits strode through them, without hesitation, without fear, as if the world belonged to them. Savannah, clutching her thrift store handbag, felt like she was walking into a space she had no rightful claim to. The plaza was busier than she expected at 8:23 in the morning. Men in charcoal coats hurried past with steaming paper cups. Women in polished heels didn't seem to notice the wind tugging at their hair. A cyclist weaved through the foot traffic, cursing softly when his backpack strap slipped. It was a world in motion, confident and rushed, and she felt painfully out of place. Then the real gust hit. It came from her left, sharp, sudden, and unkind. Before she could brace, the wind slipped under her calf-length dress and lifted it, not a gentle flutter, but a full, humiliating sweep upward. The fabric flared like an umbrella turning inside out. Her hands flew down instinctively, grabbing at the skirt, but she was a second too late. Her old beige shapewear, years old, stretched at the seams. The one she kept because it still worked fine was on full display. For a heartbeat, the world froze. The people rushing past blurred into meaningless motion, but she felt every degree of heat rising in her face. Somewhere behind her, she heard a man choke out a surprised, half laugh quickly stifled. Another person murmured something she couldn't make out. Savannah wanted to fold into herself like paper, wanted to run back to the bus stop, wanted to vanish into the concrete. A memory barged in, uninvited, her ex-husband standing in their kitchen, arms crossed, voice cold with disappointment. "Savannah, why can't you try a little harder? You never look put together. You're almost 40, no one's going to take you seriously looking like that." That memory always cut deeper than she wished it did. "Not now," she whispered to herself, struggling with the fabric, fighting the wind as if it were alive. "Please, not today." The wind, indifferent to her, pleading, teased the dress once more before settling down, leaving her shaken, humiliated, and painfully aware of the beige cotton clinging to her thighs. She finally managed to trap the skirt under her coat, pressing it firmly against her legs as if anchoring herself to dignity. She took a shaky breath and forced her gaze upward. No one seemed to care, really. A few glances, a couple smirks, but most people kept walking, swept along by their own deadlines and worries. The world rarely paused for a stranger's embarrassment. Savannah swallowed hard. The humiliation sat on her tongue like rust. She imagined what her ex-husband would have said if he'd seen that another lecture about being messy, unprepared, too soft for the real world. And maybe he would have been right. Maybe this job at Morgan-Tech was too big for someone who still shopped clearance aisles and wore shoes she'd glued back together last winter. She stood still for a moment, hands gripping the sides of her coat, feeling the weight of every doubt she had carried from her little Wisconsin duplex to this cold, shining plaza in Minneapolis. She could go home. She could lose herself in the crowd, take the bus back, delete the onboarding email, pretend she never tried. No one at Morgan-Tech would miss her. They didn't even know her name yet. But her father's tired voice drifted into her mind, soft and worn from years of factory shifts and bad knees. "Kiddo, life doesn't give many second chances. When you get one, hold on to it." Even if your hands shake. Savannah's hands were shaking, but she straightened her back, pulled her coat tighter, pressed the wrinkles out of her skirt with slow, steady palms. And then, without allowing herself another second to think or break, she walked forward. One step, then another. Her heels tapped against the stone again, this time steadier. She kept her chin, lifted eyes forward, pretending the wind had never touched her, pretending she hadn't just felt 37 years of insecurity rush to the surface and nearly drown her. As she reached the revolving doors, the morning sunlight caught on the glass facade, throwing her faint reflection back at her. She barely recognized the woman, staring back, flushed cheeks, wind-tangled hair, and a stubborn, quiet determination in her eyes. Today, she whispered to herself, shame doesn't get to win. She placed a hand against the cool glass and stepped into the building, unaware that someone on the steps behind her had witnessed everything, and that her small act of courage was already unraveling the path of her future in ways she could never imagine. The revolving door spun her into the marble lobby, and the wind finally stayed outside. But the feeling of being seen, truly seen, in her most fragile moment followed her in like a shadow she hadn't yet noticed. Ethan Morgan had learned to prepare himself for the wind. For years, every morning at 8:15, his town car pulled up to the base of the Morgan Tech Tower. His driver would circle around, open the door, and Ethan would step out, coat perfectly fitted, tie straight, expression unreadable. He was a man built from discipline, carved by habit. And in Minneapolis, spring wind was as predictable as stock fluctuations, sharp, swift, occasionally inconvenient, but manageable if you braced for it. He'd braced for everything in his life, really. But this morning caught him unprepared. He had one foot on the last step leading to the entrance when the wind barreled through the plaza with a force that made even him blink. Papers rustled, a woman shrieked somewhere near the bus stop, and a swirl of leaves danced chaotically in the center of the walkway. And then he saw her, a woman in a simple navy dress, mid-30s, maybe a little older, hurrying across the plaza like she was late for something important. Nothing remarkable at first glance. Her coat was too thin for the cold, her shoes looked worn, and her hair had been pinned back in a way that suggested function over vanity. But when the wind hit her, everything changed. Her dress lifted sharply, exposing a flash of old beige shapewear, plain, practical, unflattering, the kind most women hoped no one would ever see. She grabbed at her skirt with both hands, but humiliation beat her to it. He saw her shoulders tighten, saw her freeze, saw that helpless moment before pride rearranges itself on a person's face. His driver coughed awkwardly and turned away, giving her the small mercy of feigned blindness. Ethan should have done the same. It would have been polite, expected, safe, but he didn't. He watched, not out of lust, not out of judgment, but out of something he couldn't name, yet something quietly urgent. The woman finally wrestled her dress back down. Her face burned with embarrassment, visible even across the wide plaza. For a second, he thought she might cry or turn and run. Most people would. He'd seen executives freeze under far less humiliating pressures. But she didn't. She stood there, breathing hard, grounding herself. Then slowly, like someone choosing bravery, 1 inch at a time, she straightened her back, smoothed her coat, and continued walking toward the tower. Ethan felt something in his chest shift, a faint ache he hadn't felt in years. His wife Emily had been like that, quietly stubborn in the face of things that should have broken her. Even near the end, when hospital nights felt endless, she never let pity touch her eyes. There was a kind of dignity in that, a defiance he'd never forgotten. Maybe that's why the moment hit him harder than it should have. Maybe grief had strange ways of resurfacing, riding in on the wind, wearing the face of a stranger. The woman reached the revolving doors and disappeared inside. Ethan stayed still. His driver cleared his throat. "Sir, are you heading in?" Ethan blinked, realizing he'd been staring at the empty space she'd occupied. "Yes, of course." He started moving, but the image of the woman lingered, the flare of fabric, the flush of shame, the resolve in her posture. It played back like a scene he didn't ask for but couldn't look away from. Inside the lobby, people greeted him with the usual polite nods. Assistants fell into step beside him, rattling off reminders about a 9 o'clock meeting, new contracts, emails needing approval. He heard them, but the noise slid off him like rain hitting a roof. Something else had taken precedence in his mind. Back in his office, floor-to-ceiling windows casting long shadows across the dark wood, he sat behind his desk but didn't open his laptop. Instead, he pressed his intercom button. "Claire," he said. His assistant's voice immediately joined the room. "Yes, Mr. Morgan, I need a list of all new hires or transfers starting this week. Every department." A pause. "Of course." "Is there a specific position you're looking for?" "No," he said too quickly. "Just send it." He felt ridiculous. A CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, requesting employee rosters because a stranger had embarrassed herself in front of him. Absurd, irrational, not him. And yet, when Claire emailed the file 10 minutes later, Ethan opened it without hesitation. He scrolled past engineers, analysts, 2 new HR coordinators. His eyes skimmed, headshots, polished, smiles, business casual stiffness, predictable backgrounds. Then he stopped. Name: Savannah Brooks, Department Community Outreach, start date today. Background: Wisconsin native, previous administrative roles, community volunteer work. Her photo was simple: shoulders, square hair tucked neatly behind her ear eyes, carrying a softness that suggested she'd learned to stand still in too many storms. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. So she was new. That explained the nervous pacing, the way she seemed to carry her entire life's hope in the set of her jaw. Something about her face in the photo matched the woman in the plaza, the same quiet determination he'd seen after the wind tried to shake her apart. His thumb hovered over her picture. "Savannah Brooks," he murmured under his breath, letting the name settle. The woman who kept walking. He knew better than to let curiosity take root. He had built a life around boundaries, around structured control, around making sure nothing could slip past the armor he forged after losing Emily. But as he stared at Savannah's name, something subtle moved inside him, like a locked door shifting slightly on its hinges. He didn't fully open it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Still, the wind had carried more than just cold today. Something had changed. He didn't know what it meant. He only knew he wasn't ready to stop thinking about it. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the conference room, casting a pale glow over the long table where a dozen new hires sat with crisp notepads and nervous smiles. Savannah Brooks kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, hoping no one noticed how they trembled. She had chosen a seat near the far end, close enough to appear engaged, far enough not to draw attention. The HR coordinator, a cheerful woman in a bright scarf, passed out thick orientation packets as she spoke about company values, badge access, insurance forms, and logging hours. Savannah nodded along, but her mind drifted, pulled again and again back to the plaza outside. Beige shapewear. God. She hoped the memory would fade as quickly as the wind had, but it clung to her cheeks like leftover heat. She forced herself to breathe steadily. She could not afford to dwell on humiliation today. Not here, not now. As the coordinator described the various departments within Morgan Tech, Savannah let her gaze wander. Most of the new hires couldn't have been older than 30. Fresh faces, fresh degrees, fresh confidence. She noted the way they leaned back comfortably in their chairs, tapping pens playfully against glossy notebooks, whispering to one another about parking passes and lunch spots. Savannah felt older, not in years, but in miles traveled. Her mind slipped back uninvited to the Wisconsin town she had grown up, in a stretch of faded houses, half-empty diners, and the hum of tractors from fields that seemed to stretch into forever. She could still picture her father's hands cracked, strong, oil-stained from decades of factory work. He used to say, "Hard work keeps us honest, kiddo. Nothing wrong with earning your place the long way." Savannah believed that. She still did. But sometimes the long way took too long. At 19, she thought she had found a shortcut love, or something she had mistaken for it. She'd married Mark Brooks with a heart full of hope and a head full of naive plans. He'd seemed charming then, steady job, easy smile. But charm has a way of souring when someone needs control more than companionship. It started with comments about her clothes, then her weight, then her lack of ambition. By the time she was in her mid-30s, Mark had carved away so many pieces of her confidence that she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Leaving took everything she had: savings, courage, and the belief that she deserved better. The divorce left her with debts, a small rented duplex, with a leaky roof, and a life she was too tired to rebuild alone. And yet life has a strange way of asking you to keep going. Her father's health began to fail around the same time: arthritis, breathing trouble, doctor visits that piled up like winter snow. Savannah worked wherever she could: grocery store cashier, part-time receptionist at a small auto shop, even cleaning offices on weekends. She stretched every dollar, cut coupons, learned to sleep through the hum of worry. And then one night, long after she'd closed the grocery store, she saw a job posting online: community outreach assistant, Morgan Tech Industries. She nearly scrolled past it. The pay was better than anything she'd ever earned, but the requirements felt miles out of reach. A strong understanding of community needs, experience managing local initiatives. She had none of the official words, but she had lived the reality. She'd helped neighbors with paperwork, organized small food drives, and spent years watching working-class people fight for dignity. She applied anyway. When the offer came, she cried quietly at the kitchen table, head bowed over the printed email while her father slept in the next room. So now, sitting in that conference room, surrounded by bright young professionals with polished shoes and rehearsed confidence, she reminded herself, I earned my place. Maybe not the traditional way, but I earned it. During the first break, she slipped to the side of the room, pouring herself a cup of weak coffee. Near the window, two younger hires laughed under their breath. So many new people this round, one said. Yeah, the other replied, smirking. Did you see the orientation list? They even hired someone in her 40s. Career change at that age. Bold move. Or desperate, the first one chuckled. Savannah froze, fingers tightening around her paper cup. She didn't face them. She didn't need to. Their words landed easily, like they'd been waiting for her. She turned slightly, catching her reflection in the glass, familiar lines around her eyes, a tired but gentle expression, hair pinned only half neatly. Too old, a ruthless voice whispered. Too late, too messy. Mark's voice echoed faintly in her memory. You're not cut out for anything more than small jobs, Savannah. Don't embarrass yourself. Her shoulders sagged for a moment. Then she straightened them. She looked out the window at the plaza below, watching the revolving doors spin. A gust of wind curled through the trees, lifting a few stray leaves off the ground. She thought of the way she'd walked into the building earlier, pink-faced, shaken but upright, still moving. Maybe she would always be the woman fighting the wind. Maybe that was her lot. But she was still here. She took a slow sip of coffee, ignoring the sting of overheard voices behind her. When the break ended, she returned to the table, picked up the pen from her orientation packet, and signed her name on the final form, ink pressed firmly, one clean stroke after another. I may be late to the race, she whispered under her breath, but I'm still in it. She placed the pen down, hands steady. She had no idea how much that simple decision to stay seated, to sign to claim her space, would matter in the days ahead. But something in her chest felt anchored for the first time in years. And somewhere upstairs, without either of them knowing, Ethan Morgan paused in the middle of reviewing contracts, lifting his gaze toward the floor, where orientation was taking place. An inexplicable sense that something in his building had shifted. Savannah learned quickly that a building as tall as Morgan Tech had its own kind of ecosystem, one made up of quiet routines, worn hallways, and people most executives stepped around without ever truly seeing. In her first week, she spent more time wandering between floors than sitting at her assigned desk. The community outreach department occupied a modest corner on the 14th floor, tucked between legal and facilities. Her supervisor, a patient man named Henry, encouraged her to learn the terrain before taking on her first project. So she did. She learned the login systems, the software, the reporting structure. She took notes diligently. But more than anything, she paid attention to the people. Not the vice presidents or the sleek project managers gliding through meetings, but the ones who kept everything running when no one was looking. The first was Janet, the front desk receptionist. Janet was 60 with silver hair pulled into a bun and hands that ached on rainy mornings. Her desk sat under a soft lamp that made her space feel warmer than the rest of the corporate lobby. The second morning, Savannah noticed Janet rubbing the joints of her fingers between calls, wincing slightly. You okay? Savannah asked softly as she passed. Oh, these old things. Janet lifted her hands and gave a small laugh. They've typed through 4 CEOs and at least 5 rebrands. They'll hold up. Savannah set a small packet of warming ointment next to the keyboard. Try this. My dad uses it for arthritis. Helps more than you'd think. Janet paused, surprised, then her eyes softened. You're a kind one, aren't you? Savannah shrugged. Just paying attention. The second was Tom, the night janitor. She first saw him during a late afternoon when she lost track of time, finishing a training module. The office had grown quiet, the halls empty. At 5:30, Tom pushed his cleaning cart in with the soft squeak of old wheels. He nodded politely, clearly used to being invisible. Long day, he asked, voice shy. First week, she replied, trying not to drown. He chuckled, shaking his head. Everyone drowns a little the first week here. Don't let the fancy walls fool you. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes. Want a coffee? I'm heading to the break room anyway. He blinked, surprised, as if no one had offered him anything in a long time. If you don't mind, black, please. From then on, whenever she stayed late, Savannah brought 2 cups, one for herself, one for Tom. He didn't talk much, but she learned he worked 2 jobs and had a daughter in college. He He spoke about her with pride, his voice warming each time he mentioned her name. Savannah liked these moments, quiet, simple, unpolished. They reminded her of home of grocery store aisles at closing time of gas stations lit by flickering bulbs, places where life felt honest. And she didn't know this, but someone else noticed. Ethan Morgan passed by the 14th floor lobby only a few times that week, usually on his way to brief meetings or to check in with Henry. He walked with the clipped efficiency of someone perpetually calculating the next 5 steps ahead. But twice his strides slowed when he spotted Savannah. Once she was leaning over Janet's desk, listening with genuine interest as the older woman explained the history of the building's first renovation. Ethan caught the way Savannah rested, her hands lightly on the counter, the way Janet's shoulders relaxed in her presence. Most employees spoke to Janet only when necessary. Savannah seemed to seek her out. The second time Ethan stepped off the elevator and saw Savannah crouched beside a utility cart, while Tom talked about a broken machine on the 8th floor. She wasn't in a hurry, she wasn't checking her phone. She listened, as if what Tom said mattered. Ethan didn't stop. He never did. But he slowed just for that heartbeat. His eyes caught hers for a brief second before he looked away. Savannah thought she imagined it, but Tom noticed and raised an eyebrow. "You know the boss?" Tom asked. "No," she answered quickly. "Of course not," but her pulse flickered in her throat. Later that week, the sky outside turned the color of steel as evening settled over the city. Savannah lost track of time again, submerged in drafting a report about local school partnerships. She didn't realize how late it had gotten until her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since noon. She shut down her computer and packed her bag. The hallway lights had dimmed to their nighttime setting, casting long shadows across the carpet. The building felt hollow, like an empty church after service. As she walked toward the elevator, she heard footsteps approaching from the far end of the corridor, steady, familiar, purposeful. Ethan came into view, coat draped over his arm. He looked surprised to see her. "You're still here?" he asked. Savannah tightened her grip on her bag. "Just finishing a report. I didn't realize the time." "This floor empties early," he said. "Security can be thin at night." She nodded, unsure what to respond. She wasn't used to powerful men talking to her without impatience. Ethan hesitated, glancing toward the elevator bank. "I'm heading down. Let me walk you to the lobby." "Oh, that's not necessary," she said too quickly. "I know," he replied, voice calm but resolute. "But it's late." For a moment, she considered protesting old instincts, rising the ones that told her to shrink, not take up space. But something in Ethan's expression wasn't commanding. It wasn't even protective in a patronizing way. It was considerate, human, so she nodded. They walked side by side in silence. The only sound came from the soft hum of the elevator descending. Savannah kept her eyes forward, pretending not to notice how close their shoulders were, or how the faint scent of cedar clung to his coat. When the doors opened at the lobby, Ethan stepped aside, letting her exit first. She murmured a quiet "thank you." He gave a small nod. "Have a safe night, Miss Brooks." His tone was polite, neutral, yet something unspoken lingered in the air between them. A flicker of connection, neither of them fully acknowledged. Savannah walked toward the exit, feeling the ghost of the wind outside pressing faintly against the glass. She wondered as she reached for the door why her chest felt strangely full. And upstairs in the silent elevator rising back to the executive floors, Ethan wondered why he hadn't looked away sooner. Savannah first heard the news while waiting for her coffee to brew in the 14th floor break room. The television mounted above the counter was tuned to a local business channel, normally background noise, but the red breaking news banner caught her eye. A reporter stood in front of a low gray building somewhere in rural Nebraska. The wind whipped at her jacket, rattling a chain-link fence behind her. A headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Factory supplying Morgan Tech, accused of worker abuse." Savannah froze, her hand hovering above the stack of paper cups. The broadcast cut to photos, grainy, hurried, taken by someone with shaking hands. A dim break room with peeling paint, a line of workers hunched over assembly tables. And then a close-up of a woman with tired eyes, deep-set lines carved into her cheeks, hair pulled back in a fraying band. She looked older than she probably was. Savannah felt her chest tighten. Something about that face, its exhaustion, its resignation hit too close to home. People who looked like that had raised her, taught her, worked beside her in grocery aisles and small-town shops. The reporter continued. Workers described 12-hour shifts, unsafe equipment, and unpaid overtime. The plant reportedly supplies components to Morgan Tech Industries, though the company has not responded to our requests for comment. Savannah didn't realize she had stopped breathing until the coffee machine beeped loudly behind her. Within an hour, the entire building was buzzing. By noon, Morgan Tech's PR department released a short statement claiming the allegations were inaccurate, sensationalized, and not reflective of company standards. The wording was neat, practiced, sterile. Savannah read it twice, feeling her stomach drop. The statement didn't say the reports were false. It didn't say the workers were safe. It just brushed everything aside. Henry appeared at her desk just before 1 o'clock, looking harried. Emergency all-staff meeting. Conference room A. Right now. Bring your notebook. When they arrived, the room was already packed. Directors, managers, supervisors, even people from legal who never attended these kinds of things. The air buzzed with nervous whispers. Savannah slipped into a spot along the wall. She clutched her folder, feeling small but fiercely attentive. At the front of the room stood Ethan Morgan. He wasn't speaking yet, but the way he held his shoulders, rigid, controlled, made it clear he wasn't there for theatrics. His gaze swept the room slowly, taking in each person. For the first time, Savannah understood why people said he could quiet a room without saying a word. To his right, the PR chief, a woman in a navy skirt suit, clicked a remote. The article from the Nebraska paper flashed onto the screen. "Let's address this before it spins further," she said. "Local journalists exaggerate. We've vetted previous reports from that region, always emotional, never accurate. We recommend releasing a second denial." Focused on Ethan lifted a hand, stopping her. "We're not discussing statements yet. We're discussing facts." An uncomfortable silence spread. The operations director cleared his throat. "Well, the truth is we don't have full visibility on third-party suppliers. It's complicated." "Complicated is not an answer," Ethan said evenly. "Are the accusations true?" The room rustled, papers shifted, eyes darted away. No one spoke. The PR chief stepped forward again. "Sir, we should focus on mitigating public perception. Whether the story is true or not is less relevant than—" "It is extremely relevant," Ethan said, his voice sharper now. Savannah felt her heart thud. He wasn't angry for the cameras, there were none. He was angry for reasons deeper, quieter. The legal counsel chimed in. "From a liability perspective, we recommend caution. Visiting the site or intervening directly could suggest what Ethan asked, jaw tight. That we care whether people are being forced into 12-hour shifts in unsafe conditions." A few heads lowered. No one countered him. Savannah stared down at the photo in the printed article she'd brought with her, the woman with the exhausted eyes. She thought of her father, of Janet's stiff hands, of Tom working 2 jobs while the world walked past him without looking. Someone needed to ask a simple question: what is actually happening there? But the room felt suspended, trapped between fear of scandal and fear of truth. And to her own surprise, to her absolute shock, Savannah felt her hand rise. A few people turned. Henry looked alarmed. Savannah's pulse hammered so loudly she could barely hear herself when she said, "Why don't we just go there?" The words left her mouth before she had time to doubt them. The room fell silent, utterly silent. She swallowed. "We're all guessing. The PR team is guessing. The execs are guessing. The article might be wrong or it might be right. But someone should see the factory with their own eyes, not rely on reports. Just go. Talk to the workers. Look at the conditions. Then decide what we say." A director scoffed. That's naive." Another muttered. "We don't send staff to random towns chasing rumors." Savannah felt heat crawl up her neck, but she didn't look away. Ethan's eyes were fixed on her. There was no judgment in them, no amusement, just attention, focus. As if her voice had been the first honest sound he'd heard all afternoon. He took a slow step forward. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "are you volunteering to go?" Savannah's breath caught. I didn't mean, I just thought someone should." Ethan didn't blink. "And you think you could get the truth?" She didn't know. She wasn't trained for investigations. She wasn't a senior analyst. She was just someone who still believed working people deserved to be seen. But she heard herself say, "Yes, I think I could." A ripple ran through the room. Ethan turned to the operations director. "Prepare travel and access for Miss Brooks, effective immediately." The man stammered. "But sir, she's new." "Yes," Ethan said, voice firm. "And she's the only one willing to look past the PR." Savannah's heart pounded with fear, disbelief, and something else, something electric. She had no idea what she'd just stepped into, only that she couldn't turn back. The silence after Ethan spoke hung in the room like a held breath. Savannah stood with her notebook pressed against her chest, unsure whether to lower her eyes or keep them raised. She felt dozens of gazes prickling her skin, some amused, some irritated, some openly dismissive. She had been in corporate spaces before, but never at the center of one. Certainly never as the woman whose voice had pushed an entire room off its comfortable script. A senior manager let out a soft scoff. "This is absurd," he muttered to the person beside him. "She's been here, 5 days?" A woman in a tailored blazer whispered. "This is why interns shouldn't be allowed into crisis meetings." But it was Charles Hendley who stepped forward, smoothing the sleeves of his expensive suit with slow precision. Charles was one of those men who seemed carved for boardrooms, salt and pepper hair, a smile polished enough to shine in dim light, and the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no in a meaningful way. He glanced at Savannah with a practiced mixture of sympathy and condescension. "Miss Brooks," he said, voice warm in the way a velvet rope is warm, pleasant, but meant to block. "I admire your passion, truly. But these matters require training, discretion, and experience. Flying out to Nebraska because a local paper published a story is not only naive, it's irresponsible." A few heads nodded automatically. Charles continued, "Morgan Tech must stay on message. We cannot chase every rumor. We must be strategic." He shot Ethan a sideways look, as if expecting agreement. Ethan said nothing. Savannah's pulse hammered in her ears. Every instinct told her to shrink, to apologize, to retreat into the safety of silence. She had lived most of her adult life doing just that, swallowing her objections, smoothing her presence, so she wouldn't disrupt the air around men like Charles. But something about the factory photos, the tired eyes of that woman, the echo of her father's voice, pushed her forward instead of back. She steadied her breath. "With respect," she said softly, "this isn't just a rumor. There are real workers in that plant. Real people. If conditions are bad, then a statement won't fix anything. We need to see what's happening." Charles's smile thinned. "And you believe you're the right person to make that determination?" "I believe someone should," she replied, surprising even herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Someone who will listen, not just look for what fits a report." Ethan's eyes flickered. Interest, maybe, approval. Savannah wasn't sure. "What exactly?" he asked. "Would you look for Miss Brooks?" The room shifted. A few people leaned in. The PR chief rolled her eyes. Henry froze beside her as if silently begging her not to dig herself deeper. Savannah swallowed, then spoke. "I'd look at the workers' faces," she began. "At the way they carry themselves, at the start of a shift versus the end. People can pretend they're fine, but exhaustion shows in how they move, how they stand." She felt her heartbeat slowing as the words found their rhythm. "I'd talk to them, not in a formal interview. Just human conversation. I'd ask what they wish was different. I'd ask what keeps them up at night, what they worry about providing for their families." The room was painfully still. "I'd ask to see their pay stubs," she continued. "Not just the numbers, but the deductions. Sometimes exploitation hides in the small print." A faint ripple moved through the group. A director raised his eyebrows, surprised. "And if they trust me enough," Savannah said quietly, "I'd ask to see their homes. That tells you more about working conditions than any plant tour. You can't fake the reality someone returns to every night." Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the weight of saying things she had never said aloud in a room of power. "I know what it looks like," she added, lowering her eyes briefly. "To work until you're numb. To feel ignored. My father lived that life. So did I at times. If the workers in Nebraska are suffering, they deserve someone willing to see them, not someone writing statements from across the country." When she looked back up, the room was no longer dismissive. It was quiet, deeply quiet. Ethan was the only one who moved. He inhaled slowly, as if grounding himself, then turned toward Charles. "Anything you'd like to add?" Ethan asked, his voice even. Charles hesitated, his jaw tightened. "Only that this proposal is risky, unprofessional. She doesn't have the credentials." Ethan nodded once, understood. He faced Savannah again. "Pack a bag." Her breath caught. "You're flying to Nebraska tomorrow morning," he said. "I want the truth, not the version written to protect us." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "You've given me the only actionable suggestion today." A few mouths fell open. The PR chief blinked rapidly. Henry whispered a faint, "My God." Charles looked as though he'd bitten into something sour. His polished confidence flickered just for a moment. Savannah felt an overwhelming wave of everything. Fear first, sharp and cold. Relief second, deeper, like the ground settling beneath her feet. and beneath both a strange sense of rightness that both steadied and terrified her. She had crossed a line she didn't know existed, and there was no going back. Ethan dismissed the room. As people filed out, whispering, glancing, calculating, Savannah stayed glued to the spot, trying to process what she had just agreed to. She didn't see Ethan look back at her before he left, but he did. And his expression didn't quite match the mask he wore for the rest of the world. The Nebraska sky was a pale, washed-out blue when Savannah stepped off the shuttle bus. A thin layer of dust lifted under her shoes, with every step clinging to her hemline, settling onto her coat. The air smelled faintly of metal and old grain, an industrial scent she remembered from childhood visits to her father's factory, the kind that hung in your hair long after you left. The town was small enough that she could stand in the cracked asphalt parking lot of the motel and see nearly everything at once: a row of diners with peeling paint, a thrift store with a hand-lettered sign, a long straight road, stretching out toward the horizon where the factory sat like a dull, gray block. This was the place behind the headlines, and she was about to walk directly into the lives of the people whose tired eyes had stared back from those low-resolution photos. She rented a dented sedan from the only rental lot in town and drove toward the plant. Along the way, she passed acres of flat fields, some fallow, some dotted with rusted farm equipment. A cluster of trailers came into view, small homes arranged tightly, laundry hanging between them like faded flags. She'd come back to that place later. For now, her steps were leading her to the source. The factory gates squeaked when she pulled them open. Inside, the noise hit her first metal, striking metal conveyor belts, humming boots, scuffing concrete. But beneath the mechanical rhythm was something subtler: weariness, a heaviness that settled into the way people moved. A supervisor escorted her through, attempting politeness but clearly irritated. He gave quick explanations of each station, but avoided eye contact whenever she asked a direct question. "Are overtime hours mandatory?" she asked at one point. "Only when we're behind," he replied too quickly. "And the workers are paid for all of it." "Oh yes," he said, eyes shifting away. "Of course." But the line workers told a different story. The first woman Savannah approached was sorting metal components into bins. She looked to be in her late 40s, but exhaustion made her seem closer to 60. Savannah introduced herself gently, explained why she was visiting, and asked if she might ask a few questions. The woman hesitated, glancing nervously toward the supervisor, but when Savannah quietly promised she wouldn't use her name, the woman nodded. "Often they don't pay us for all the extra hours," she said in a low voice. "And if you bring it up, they say you're ungrateful. They always threaten cuts." Savannah's throat tightened. "Has anyone been hurt working here?" The woman lifted her hand slightly, showing a scar across her knuckles. "Machine guard broke last winter. Took months to fix it. Some of us lost hours waiting for repairs. Others kept working anyway." Savannah noticed the guard on the nearest machine, a piece of metal bent backward, barely attached. She took photos discreetly. She recorded with permission. Each worker she spoke with added another piece to the story, a story far more real than any crafted statement could ever be. Later that afternoon, she returned to the trailer park she had passed earlier. Children played in the dust, kicking an old soccer ball with bare feet. A little boy sat on a porch step doing homework at a plastic table that wobbled beneath him. A woman hung jeans on a clothesline, her motions stiff with fatigue. Savannah approached gently, introducing herself just as she had in the factory. That was how she met Martha. Martha was in her early 60s, with a soft voice that seemed to whisper even when she spoke. Her trailer was clean, but cramped: 2 small rooms, a narrow kitchen, and a heater that rattled like it was negotiating its own survival. Martha offered her tea, apologizing for not having cream, and settled across from Savannah at a tiny table. Her hands trembled when she lifted the cup. "They told us we better not talk to anyone," she said. "Said they'd start layoffs if folks started complaining." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "But my husband passed last spring. I'm all my grandkids have. What choice do I have?" Savannah felt her own voice tighten. "I'm so sorry, Martha. They work us like we're machines," the older woman whispered. "But we're not machines, we're people. And we're tired." Savannah asked gently if she could record what Martha said, only audio, no names. Martha hesitated, then nodded. "If it helps someone, if it makes them listen." By evening, Savannah's notebook was full. Her phone held videos, photos, and recordings. Each one felt heavy, like a stone in her pocket. Back in her motel room, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small mountain of evidence. Papers spread across the blanket, screenshots glowing in the dim light. Martha's voice playing back softly. We're people. And we're tired. Savannah's breath shook. What if she was wrong? What if speaking up got people fired? What if the company dismissed every word? Charles would tear her apart. PR would bury the truth. And Ethan? She didn't know what Ethan would do. Fear clawed at her. She reached for her phone and hovered over the delete button. It would be so easy to erase everything, pretend she'd found nothing, go home. But then she saw Martha's trembling hands in her mind, and the boy doing homework on an unstable table, and the scar across the line worker's knuckles. Her phone buzzed. A call from Ethan. He'd called every night so far. First to ask for updates, then subtly, gradually just to ask how she was doing. He'd spoken once about his late wife Emily and how helpless he felt toward the end. There was grief in his voice, but also gentleness. Tonight she didn't answer. Instead, with trembling fingers, she typed a short text. You need to see this yourself, sir. She attached the video of Martha's quiet, breaking voice. Then she pressed send. She stared at the screen long after the message delivered, heart pounding as if she had stepped off a cliff and wasn't sure yet whether she was falling or finally learning how to land. Savannah didn't sleep much on the flight back to Minneapolis. Her notebook lay open on the tray table, filled with cramped handwriting and taped-on pay-stub copies. Her phone held hours of recordings she'd replayed over and over. Martha's trembling voice, the rhythmic clatter of unsafe machines, the hushed confessions of workers terrified of losing the only jobs they could find in 3 counties. The closer the plane drew to the city lights of Minneapolis, the more the weight in her chest grew. She wasn't returning with a tidy report. She was returning with a truth the company had never intended to confront. Traffic was light when she took a cab to the Morgantech Tower. The building's glass facade reflected the winter dusk like a cold promise. Inside, the lobby hummed with its usual measured elegance, but tonight the echo of her footsteps felt louder, sharper. She took the elevator to the executive floor. Ethan was already waiting in the small conference room, jacket, off sleeves rolled slightly as if he hadn't left the office since she'd sent that video. He stood when she entered. Savannah, he said quietly. No title, no formality, just her name. She set her folder on the table. You saw the video, he nodded once. The lines around his eyes looked deeper, worn down by something more emotional than fatigue. I did. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she opened the folder and began. The prepared report was 30 pages long, but what mattered wasn't the pages, it was the human story inside them. She started with the missing safety guards. Then pay stubs showing mysteriously reduced overtime, photos of workers' cramped living conditions, the interview with the woman who had the scar on her knuckles, and finally Martha's quiet testimony about being threatened. Ethan listened, with his hands clasped in front of his mouth, brows drawn tight. He didn't interrupt, not once. When she finished, he leaned back slowly. This, his voice caught. He cleared it. This is serious. More serious than the public knows, she said softly. There was a vulnerability in her tone. She hadn't meant to reveal fear, not for herself, but for the people she'd left behind in Nebraska. We need to address this, she added. Yes, Ethan said, we do. But we didn't mean the same thing to everyone. Within an hour, several senior executives crowded into Ethan's conference room, summoned by urgent emails. They flipped through Savannah's report with stiff expressions, some frowning in concern, others in annoyance. The CFO was the first to speak. Even if these claims are true, we cannot publicize all of this. The board will panic. Investors will interpret it as a supply chain collapse. The head of PR added, we should release a statement promising to look into it but keep the details internal. The share price could take a hit if we confirm any wrongdoing. Savannah watched the conversation shift from human suffering to stock value. Each word made her stomach twist tighter. One executive said, this is exactly why we shouldn't have sent a junior employee. She collected too much raw emotion. It's not objective. Ethan's voice cut through the noise. Are you suggesting the suffering of our workers is inconvenient data? Silence. Savannah had never been in a room where a single man could freeze the air like that. The executive sputtered, I'm just saying we need context, sir. Context, Ethan repeated, eyes dark. You saw the photos. You heard the recordings. The CFO straightened crumpled pages. We can't confirm any of this until we audit the plant ourselves. And even then, we need to consider how we release findings. The truth doesn't have to hit all at once. Savannah understood the meaning behind the words, we can bury the worst parts. She felt her pulse rising. With respect, she said shakily, you shouldn't bury any part of it. These people trusted me. They trusted this company. Charles Hendley entered the room, then as if summoned by the mention of trust. He walked with calculated confidence, nodding to the board members but offering Savannah a thin, unreadable smile. He took a seat beside the CFO. "I've reviewed the preliminary summary," he said. "We must be careful not to jump to conclusions based on the perspectives of a few upset workers." Savannah bristled. "It wasn't a few." Charles raised a hand, patronizing. "Miss Brooks, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're new. You haven't learned yet how narratives can be manipulated." Savannah felt her throat tighten. Ethan noticed. His jaw flexed. "We will hear her presentation in full," Ethan said firmly. "All of it." And he meant it. The next morning, Savannah stood in the large wood-paneled boardroom. The long oval table gleamed under recessed lighting. Screens around the room displayed her first slide, a photo of the factory floor in Nebraska. A dozen board members sat around the table watching her, with varying degrees of skepticism, politeness, or impatience. Ethan sat near the center, hands folded, gaze steady. Savannah began. Her voice wavered at first, but as she moved from picture to picture, workers' faces peeling paint-broken machine guards, her courage steadied. She read short quotes from workers. She showed pay stubs with unexplained deductions. She played a brief audio clip of Martha describing the threats they received. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Another scribbled notes with a tight jaw. Then Savannah moved to the last section. "The following documents," she said carefully, "came from internal communications between Morgantech's supply chain coordinators and plant leadership." The screen displayed a memo. Savannah felt the temperature in the room drop as she read aloud. "Avoid any public disclosure that may lead to negative media attention. Push productivity targets. Downplay safety concerns." Another memo appeared. And another. At the bottom of each one was the same signature, Charles Hendley, Vice President of Operations. A sharp, cold silence sliced through the room. Charles's face remained still, but his knuckles went white where he gripped his pen. Savannah took a breath, steadying herself. These emails show that Mr. Hendley was aware of the issues, and he instructed the plant to suppress complaints. No one moved. No one spoke. The truth hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. And the boardroom, once warm with polite artificiality, now felt colder than the Nebraska wind. If the room had been cold before, it froze solid the moment Charles Hendley rose from his chair. He adjusted his cufflinks with the slow confidence of a man who had weathered storms far worse than a young woman's report. When he spoke, his voice was measured, almost soothing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I believe we're all forgetting perspective." A few board members exhaled in relief, as if he were the adult stepping in to tidy up a child's mistake. Charles turned to Savannah with an expression that almost resembled pity. "Miss Brooks means well, but she is very new, unfamiliar with our processes, and susceptible to misinterpreting raw data." Savannah felt her chest tighten. She forced herself to stand straighter. Charles clicked a remote. Her own report, altered charts, swollen percentages flashed grotesquely on the screens around them. "These numbers," he said smoothly, "are exaggerated, wildly so. A 28% injury rate, impossible. A 60-hour average work week, also false." Savannah blinked. "Those are not my figures," Charles smiled. "Understandably, you may think they are. But the files you gave us contained these errors. Sloppy documentation is common among employees who lack corporate experience." Whispers rippled around the table. Savannah shook her head. "I checked those numbers. Twice." "That's not." Charles raised a hand, silencing her the way a parent hushes a child mid-protest. "And as for the testimony she collected," he sighed, "we all know how easily workers can be influenced, especially when an interviewer arrives emotional and eager to validate a narrative." Savannah felt heat crawl up her neck. Emotional, a word men like him used like a blade. But Charles wasn't finished. He tapped his folder. "During our standard background vetting," his tone suggested this was merely due diligence, "we learned Miss Brooks recently went through a difficult divorce, significant financial strain, employment instability." Savannah's stomach dropped. He wasn't just attacking her report, he was attacking her. Charles continued, voice dripping sympathy. "It's understandable she might relate too deeply to struggling workers. It happens. Personal hardship can cloud professional judgment." The ground beneath her felt as if it were tilting inch by inch. A few board members nodded slowly, reluctantly. Bias, vulnerability. A woman in her late 30s, single, financially stretched, easy to portray as unstable. Savannah swallowed hard, her throat thick. She felt 16 again, standing in a kitchen with Mark, criticizing her weight, her choices, her worth. "You're too sensitive, Savannah. That's your problem." You twist everything into drama. Ethan finally spoke, leaning forward, voice low but firm. Charles, that's enough. Charles arched a brow. I'm simply pointing out that we cannot base corporate policy on the interpretations of someone who may not understand the broader business context. Savannah felt a tremor in her hands. She clasped them behind her back, hoping no one noticed. Ethan's eyes flicked to her steady grounding. Then he addressed the room. We will conduct a full audit of the Nebraska plant. Effective immediately, the CFO protested. Ethan, it's not negotiable, Ethan said. His tone left no space for argument. Even Charles's eyes narrowed. But the damage was already rippling. When the meeting ended, board members filed out with uneasy expressions. Some offered Savannah polite nods, their eyes avoiding hers. Others avoided her, entirely unwilling to be seen standing too close to a sinking ship. Charles lingered by the door. He gave Savannah a soft smile, softer than kindness, sharper than cruelty. Corporate life is complicated, Miss Brooks. I hope you don't take this too personally. She couldn't speak, not without her voice cracking. Charles took her silence as concession, then walked out, his shoes clicking against polished wood. The sound echoed long after he was gone. That night, Savannah sat at her small kitchen table, papers spread out before her, her real report, her real numbers. Her apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the faint whistle of wind through the window frame. She opened her laptop to review her files. Her stomach twisted. Some of her documents looked different. Numbers inflated, columns misaligned, dates changed. Files she hadn't touched since returning from Nebraska. Her breath hitched. No, that's not possible. But it was. Someone with access, someone powerful, someone who wanted her discredited. Her phone buzzed. A new email. Subject: Administrative leave. Notice sender HR, Compliance Division. She clicked it with numb fingers. Miss Brooks, in light of potential misconduct in documentation and reporting, you are placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending full review. Misconduct. The word stared back at her, cold and merciless. Her heart lodged somewhere between her ribs. Shame, not the hot kind from earlier weeks, but the deep, choking kind she thought she'd left behind, with mark flooded up her throat. Not enough, never enough. The old voices returned relentless. She buried her face in her hands. She had worked so hard, fought so hard, believed so hard, and now she was a liability. A stain, a mistake to be quarantined. A soft sob escaped before she could stop it. She pressed her palms to her eyes until stars flashed behind her lids. She didn't know if this was the end of her job or the beginning of a battle. She wasn't sure she had the strength to fight. The email buzzed on the screen again, as if demanding acknowledgement. But all Savannah could do was sit there trembling, staring at the kitchen table where she had once dared to believe she'd finally found her second chance. The days afterward felt strangely hollow, as if Savannah were drifting through the quiet rooms of her own life without touching anything fully. Her small duplex was usually a place she cherished, simple but hers. Now, every corner seemed to echo with the accusation in that email. Administrative leave, possible misconduct, words that scraped at her like grit under the skin. She tried to stay busy. People said keeping your hands moving kept the mind from collapsing. So she watered the 2 spider plants on her windowsill, even though they didn't need water yet. She sorted old bills, stacking them into neat piles that made her kitchen table look like a cluttered battlefield. She swept the floor twice, then again. But nothing quieted the voice in her head. You always ruin good things, her ex-husband's words. She hadn't thought of him in months. But shame had a way of resurrecting ghosts, especially the ones who knew exactly where to press. On the 3rd day, her father called. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice crackling through the line like old radio static. "Haven't heard from you in a bit." Savannah tried to sound normal, "Just busy inside my head." He chuckled, the sound soft and weary. That's a dangerous place to be alone. She didn't tell him about the leave, about Charles, about the investigation. He worried enough already. His breathing had been rough lately. She could hear it even now. But fathers have a way of sensing things. "You're hurting," he said gently. And just like that, tears pricked her eyes. She swallowed hard and whispered, "I'm trying, Dad." "I know you are," he said. "Just remember, people like you don't break easy, even when the world thinks you should." She held onto those words like a handrail. The phone rang again that evening, Ethan's number. Her heart tightened. She let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Savannah." His voice always sounded steady, but tonight there was strain beneath it. I received the notice from HR, he said. I need you to know it wasn't my decision. I know. She picked at the edge of her sleeve. It's procedure, it's bureaucracy, he corrected. And it does not reflect my trust in you. The way he said trust made her throat tighten. She asked, is there anything I can do? He hesitated. Not directly. During an internal review, everything you do is monitored, interpreted. If you appear too defensive, they'll claim you're trying to influence the outcome. If you speak publicly, they'll frame it as retaliation. So, I just wait. For now, he said, though the frustration in his voice suggested he hated the word as much as she did. There was a pause, thick, heavy. Then Ethan said quietly, I don't believe you falsified a single thing, not one. Her eyes burned. She looked toward the dark window, unable to say anything more than a soft, thank you. But thank you didn't feel big enough. He exhaled as if wanting to say more, something personal, something he wasn't allowed to say as her CEO. Instead, he murmured, we'll get to the truth. The call ended, leaving her with a strange ache, half comfort, half longing. Later that week, Savannah stopped by the Morgan Tech lobby to return a building fob she wasn't allowed to keep during leave. The revolving doors swished as she approached, and for a moment she almost didn't go in fear, tightening her chest like a clamp. But then she saw Janet, the receptionist, her silver bun bobbing as she answered phones. When Janet noticed her, she immediately waved Savannah over. You come here, she said softly, her eyes narrowing at the sight of Savannah's tired face. Savannah handed over the fob. I didn't want to mail it. Janet leaned across the counter. You listen to me. That man Charles, he's been here a long time, long enough to get comfortable stepping on anyone who doesn't serve his interests. Savannah blinked. You know what's happening, Janet smiled sadly. Honey, I know more than the people in corner offices think I do. And I know this, you told the truth. That matters, even when the people upstairs pretend it doesn't. Another voice joined in. Tom, the night janitor, emerged from behind a tall plant he'd been trimming. He wiped his hands on his work pants, giving Savannah a shy nod. Heard you're having a rough week, he said quietly. If it helps, the folks you talked to in Nebraska, they deserved someone to tell their story. Savannah's chest clenched. I'm scared their story is going to die in a file somewhere. Tom's gaze met hers. Then don't let it. Those words lodged themselves deep. That night, Savannah sat at her kitchen table again. But this time she didn't stare at the accusation email. She opened her personal laptop, the one Morgan Tech had no access to, and pulled up her independent notes, her handwritten logs, her backup photos saved to her own drive, and she began making calls. One by one, workers from the Nebraska plant answered, some from cramped trailers, some from dim kitchens, some while whispering into the phone so supervisors wouldn't hear. They remembered her, they trusted her. And when she explained what had happened to her report, every single one offered to help. I can send you my pay stubs. I'll record what the supervisor told me. Come back if you need more. We'll talk again. Martha says she'll speak on camera if she has to. Savannah typed, saved, organized, and time-stamped everything, this time in duplicate, triple-checked, backed up to cloud drives. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She wasn't even doing it for her job. She did it because these people deserved someone who wouldn't crumble when the powerful told her to sit down. By midnight, she had rebuilt nearly her entire investigation, clean, solid, tamper-proof. She sat back, exhausted, but steadier than she'd felt in days. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Ethan. Only 3 words. Are you okay? She stared at the screen, then typed the truth. Not really, but I'm not done. She hit send. And for the first time since she'd been suspended, she felt something shift inside her. Not loud or triumphant, but quiet, firm, unbreakable. Savannah had never seen the Morgan Tech legal floor before. It was quieter than the rest of the building, too quiet. The lights were soft, the carpets a muted gray, the artwork abstract and cold. Everything here seemed designed to make a person feel small. She walked down the hallway slowly, palms damp despite her steady breathing. She wore her best navy dress, the same one she'd worn on her first day, except now she paired it with low black flats. She wanted her footing to be sure. At the end of the corridor, a conference room door stood open. Inside, a long table stretched across the room like a dividing line. On one side sat Charles Hendley, flanked by 2 representatives from legal and an HR compliance manager, with a tight bun and a tighter expression. On the other side sat a single empty chair. Her chair. Ethan was there too, but standing off to the side near a window, arms folded. He wasn't technically part of the hearing, but CEOs were allowed to observe, and he'd insisted on attending. He gave her a small nod when she walked in, quiet, steady, reassuring. But he stayed silent. Procedure required it. Miss Brooks, the HR manager said as Savannah took her seat, this hearing concerns possible misconduct regarding falsified documentation in your Nebraska report. Savannah folded her hands in her lap. I understand. Charles smiled politely as if wishing her a pleasant afternoon. We appreciate your cooperation, Savannah. He used her first name, the way someone uses a fingertip to close a book gently but conclusively. The HR manager slid a stack of papers toward Savannah. We'd like to begin by reviewing the discrepancies. Savannah glanced down and felt her stomach tighten. These were the altered numbers, machine injury rates, inflated overtime hours, twisted into absurdity. Charles steepled his fingers. As you can see, these figures are impossible. They reflect a lack of proper vetting and analysis. Savannah kept her expression calm. Those aren't my numbers. Charles tilted his head. They're the numbers submitted from your office laptop. Someone edited them. A soft chuckle rounded the table. Charles didn't laugh, but the faintest smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Miss Brooks, the HR manager said, are you suggesting someone tampered with your report? Yes, Savannah said simply. And who, Charles asked smoothly, would do that? Savannah didn't answer. Not yet. She felt Ethan's eyes on her, warm but restrained. The HR manager continued. We received these files directly from your device. Additionally, several board members have expressed concern that your emotional investment in the Nebraska workers may have influenced your conclusions. Emotional. Again, Savannah inhaled slowly. She had expected this, prepared for it. She slid her hand into her leather tote and placed a thick beige folder on the table. I brought something to add to the record, she said softly. Charles's eyes sharpened. The HR manager frowned. Miss Brooks, please note that external documents are not. They are, Savannah said, meeting her gaze. Direct statements sent to my personal email from Nebraska workers. Not my company account. Not accessible to anyone at Morgan Tech. That quieted the room. She opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, signed consent forms, time-stamped photographs, and a neatly organized binder of pay stubs sent to her over the past week. She placed the first photo in the center of the table, a machine missing its safety guard. The next photo, a pay stub with unexplained deductions. Then another, a trailer home with mold creeping up the walls. The HR manager picked up the papers slowly, the stiffness in her posture beginning to soften. These, Savannah said, her voice steady, matched the numbers I recorded originally. Not the altered ones. Charles leaned back, the faintest tension flickering across his jaw. Anyone can doctor a photo, Miss Brooks. Savannah didn't flinch. That's why I brought audio too. She pulled out her phone, connected it to the room speaker, and pressed play. A woman's voice, tired, gentle, unmistakably real, filled the room. They told us not to complain, or we'd lose our jobs. It was Martha. Savannah played another clip. A male worker, we haven't been paid overtime in 3 weeks. Then another. The guard on that machine broke months ago. I told them. They said not to make trouble. The room grew still. Charles's pen stopped moving. The HR manager swallowed. Savannah set the phone down. These people shared their lives with me. Their fears, their pay stubs, their truth. Then she looked directly at the panel. If you say I lied, her voice softened, almost breaking. You're saying they don't exist. No theatrics, no raised voice, no dramatic pause, just the truth. And in that quiet, the contrast between her steady sincerity and Charles's polished denials became impossible to miss. The HR manager turned toward Charles. Mr. Hendley, do you have a response to these independently sourced materials? Charles forced a smile. I'm sure Miss Brooks believes these people, but their stories must be verified. This is exactly why we avoid relying on overly emotional. That's enough, Ethan said. The words cracked through the room like a struck bell. Everyone froze. Ethan stepped forward, expression tightened into something carved and immovable. We have a responsibility to truth, he said evenly. Not spin, not convenience. He looked at Savannah, then back at the table. And certainly not intimidation. Charles opened his mouth to protest, but the HR manager lifted a hand. For the first time, she wasn't looking at Savannah with suspicion. She was looking at Charles. The balance in the room had shifted, just slightly, but enough. Savannah exhaled, slowly gripping the edge of her folder under the table, even as the uncertainty still pooled heavy inside her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in weeks, she felt the scales tip, however faintly, toward justice. The morning after the hearing, the air in the Morgan Tech Tower felt different, too still, too expectant. Word had spread quietly but unmistakably that something had cracked open behind those legal conference room doors. Savannah rode the elevator alone, her hands clasped around the strap of her tote bag. She didn't know if she was supposed to come in today. Not officially, her leave hadn't been lifted. But the HR manager had asked her to return for a follow-up discussion, and that phrase had kept her awake most of the night. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, Ethan was already waiting outside the glass meeting room. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't checking his phone. He stood perfectly still, hands in his pockets, as if holding himself together by sheer will. Their eyes met. Something eased in his expression, not relief, not joy, but a quiet recognition. "Morning," he said softly. Savannah nodded, though her throat was tight. "Morning." Inside, the HR panel sat at the far end of the long table once more. Charles was there too, but this time he wasn't flanked by confidence. He looked alert, tense, one hand pressed flat on a folder as if ready to defend himself at any moment. The HR manager cleared her throat. "Mr. Morgan, you requested IT to analyze the document logs." Ethan didn't sit. He stepped forward, placing a printed report on the table. "Yes, and they finished the audit 10 minutes ago." Silence stretched thin. Savannah felt her heart thudding behind her ribs, too loud, too hopeful, too dangerous. Ethan opened the report. "The logs confirm," he said, voice even, "that Mr. Hendley accessed Miss Brooks' files 3 separate times, late evenings, unauthorized, and from a remote terminal." Charles's jaw clenched. "I reviewed her data as part of my due diligence." "That is not what the logs show," Ethan cut in. His tone was calm, but underneath it ran something colder. "You didn't review her data, you modified it." The HR manager's eyes widened. The legal representative shifted in his chair. Charles's voice sharpened. "You have no proof of intent." "Intent?" Ethan lifted the report again. "You replaced several of Savannah's original tables with inflated figures. You changed timestamps. You even deleted a backup file she saved." He paused. "Those actions require deliberate overrides, which you performed." The room felt like ice. For the first time since she'd started working here, Savannah watched Charles lose the smooth composure he wrapped around himself like armor. His fingers dug into the folder in front of him. "This is a misunderstanding," he said through tight teeth. "No," Ethan answered. "It isn't." The HR manager inhaled slowly. "Mr. Hendley, given this evidence, we have no choice but to recommend immediate suspension pending termination review." Charles stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping the floor. "You're making a mistake." Ethan didn't flinch. The mistake was thinking Morgan Tech would choose image over integrity. With a final stiff breath, Charles gathered his folder and walked out. The door closed with a quiet, definitive click, and just like that, the storm he created began to dissipate, leaving behind a heavy, stunned quiet. Savannah's pulse hammered in her ears. The HR manager turned to her. "Miss Brooks, we owe you an apology." Savannah blinked. "What? We accepted tampered evidence," she said. "We questioned your conduct based on documents Mr. Hendley manipulated. That should never have happened." Savannah stared at her hands, unsure what to say. And the HR manager added, "Your administrative leave is lifted, effective immediately." Before Savannah could breathe, Ethan stepped forward. "There's more," he said. The room looked at him. Ethan inhaled deeply, shoulders rising, falling, as if preparing to do something he had been rehearsing silently for days. "Savannah Brooks told us the truth, when it was inconvenient," he said clearly. "And our response was to question her integrity. That ends today." Savannah's breath caught. He continued, voice steady and strong. "I'm issuing a full public statement acknowledging the failures in Nebraska, ours, not the workers, and I'm appointing Miss Brooks to lead our new ethical labor initiative, working directly with me. Her investigation is not only reinstated, it will guide the changes we make moving forward." The HR panel looked stunned, not because they disagreed, but because CEOs didn't usually speak like this. Not in front of subordinates, not with this open accountability. Then Ethan turned toward Savannah, not as a CEO, not as her superior, but as a man who saw her. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "for what this company put you through." Her eyes burned. She blinked rapidly, willing herself not to cry. The formalities ended quickly after that. Papers were collected, chairs pushed back. The panel left, giving Savannah glances that mixed apology and respect. Soon the room emptied, leaving only the soft humming of the building's ventilation. And Ethan. He stood near the window, sunlight outlining him like a thin halo around his shoulders. "You didn't have to defend me like that," Savannah murmured. He turned, leaning a hand against the window frame. I did. It could affect your reputation. Then let it. His voice softened. I've protected my image for too many years. It's time I protect the right things. Savannah swallowed emotion, tightening her chest. Ethan took a slow step toward her. I need to tell you something, he said. Something I've kept to myself because I wanted to be sure I wasn't repeating old patterns, the power imbalance, the expectations that come with it. She looked up, meeting his eyes. He held her gaze gently. I've been drawn to you since that day on the plaza. Since you straightened your shoulders and walked into this building, like the world wasn't allowed to break you. Savannah's breath shook. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Scared of losing myself again. Scared of slipping back into someone else's shadow. Ethan stepped closer, not closing the distance completely, but enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. Then let's make sure, he said softly together, that you don't. Not a grand declaration. Not a sweeping confession. Just a careful promise, the kind two people make when they've already known loss and understand how fragile hope can be. Savannah felt the fear inside her ease, just slightly. Just enough to breathe. Just enough to consider stepping forward. Spring arrived slowly in Minneapolis, slipping in on soft breezes and the first brave buds of tulips along the sidewalks. With it came a strange, quiet turning point in Savannah's life. Not dramatic, not sweeping, but steady, like the slow melting of ice. In the months following the Nebraska scandal, her world changed shape. Not suddenly, not all at once, but unmistakably. She became the face of Morgan Tech's new ethical labor initiative, a role she never imagined for herself. Her days were filled with travel to plants in Iowa, Kentucky, Pennsylvania. She met line workers, safety officers, single mothers working double shifts, supervisors who tried their best with limited budgets, and others who had looked the other way for too long. She listened, really listened, and took notes in careful handwriting. And the thing that surprised her most was that people listened back. At each site, she gathered teams around folding tables and said, "Tell me what you need. Tell me what doesn't work." There were long pauses at first, workers unsure whether Morgan Tech really wanted honesty. But she kept showing up. She kept asking. And slowly, truth spilled open. She built safety standards with them, not over them. Added protocols for overtime pay, anonymous reporting channels, community audits. Her name, once whispered as the intern who almost caused a PR disaster, became associated with fairness, transparency, accountability. People stopped whispering out of suspicion. They whispered out of respect. Through all this, she and Ethan managed something most people didn't expect: boundaries. Strict boundaries. At work, they behaved like colleagues. Meetings always included at least 2 other staff members. No closed doors. No inside jokes. No gentle looks that lingered too long. Some days Savannah saw the effort it took Ethan to maintain that distance. The quick shift of his gaze, the polite but clipped tone he used to flatten anything personal that threatened to slip through. Some days the effort cost her something too, but they held the line. Not to hide, but to protect what might someday exist between them. Outside of work, their connection took on a gentler rhythm. Saturday mornings, they met at a small lakefront cafe, known mostly to locals, a place with wooden chairs, mismatched mugs, and a view of the water rippling under early sunlight. They sat across from each other with simple breakfast plates and steaming black coffee. They talked, not about work, not about scandal, but about the quieter, more fragile parts of life. Ethan told her about Emily, his late wife, the way she used to hum old jazz tunes in the kitchen, the stubborn streak she had when arguing the hollow ache her absence still created years later. Savannah told him about her failed marriage, how she'd married young, hopeful, and ended up small inside a man's shadow. She admitted how long it took to trust her own voice again. Sometimes they walked the length of the lake afterwards, side by side, hands brushing by accident, and then drifting apart like 2 birds, not yet sure whether to share the same wind. Theirs wasn't a love story written in fire. It was written in embers, steady, warm, choosing its own slow burn. Back at Morgan Tech, whispers still existed, of course. Office gossip never died completely. But more and more employees had seen Savannah stand in front of workers in Kentucky and ask tough questions. They'd seen her challenge managers twice her experience. They'd seen her take meticulous notes, speak respectfully, insist on safer equipment and fairer hours. Whatever people might speculate about her and the CEO, one thing became undeniable. Savannah Brooks earned her seat, and no one could take that from her again. One warm afternoon in early June, Morgan Tech held a company-wide town hall. Workers from multiple states joined by video giant screens flickering with faces from factories and offices across the country. The room buzzed with anticipation. Ethan stood at the front with members of the board, but it was Savannah who was asked to speak. She stepped onto the stage with a small stack of note cards, though everyone knew she wouldn't need them. The lights felt hot on her skin, but her hands were steady as she adjusted the microphone. "Hi everyone," she began. "I'm Savannah. Some of you know me from your factory floors, break rooms, safety walkthroughs, or from conversations we had over coffee or during your night shift." A few people chuckled softly. Her voice grew gentler. "I want to say something I wish someone had said to me a long time ago. Your work is seen. Your long hours are seen. Your frustrations, your ideas, your sacrifices, they matter. You matter." A murmur of emotion rippled through the screens. Savannah continued, "I didn't come to this company with the cleanest resume, or the most confidence, or a strong network. I came here because I needed a second chance, and I found one, not because everything went right, but because everything went wrong, and we told the truth anyway." She paused. She didn't cry, but there was a tremor in her voice that made the room lean in. "And now," she said, "your voices are shaping the future of Morgantech, not because you shouted the loudest, but because you spoke honestly. And honesty is how real change begins." Applause rose from every corner of the room, from the screens, from people she hadn't even met yet. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't wild, it was steady, the kind of support that builds, not explodes. Savannah let herself breathe. Just once, she turned her head instinctively toward Ethan. He stood slightly apart from the board, his expression unguarded, proud, quietly emotional, something deeper resting in his eyes. Their gazes met. Not long, not lingering, just long enough to say, "We're building something here. Something that doesn't rush, something that lasts." Savannah felt warmth rise in her chest, not overwhelming, not consuming, but steady and sure. The applause faded, the screens flickered, people began to disperse, and she stood there a moment more, letting the weight of the moment settle around her. A different kind of partnership, she realized, wasn't built in declarations. It was built exactly like this, slowly, carefully, day by day. Late autumn in Minnesota carried a kind of beauty that demanded quiet. The lake was half still, half stirred by drifting ripples. The sky was pale gold near the horizon, fading into a deepening blue. Leaves skittered across the wooden planks of the pier like tiny messengers of the season's change. Savannah wrapped her coat more tightly around herself as she walked beside Ethan. Their steps matched without trying. They had come here after a long week of travel, 2 plants inspected, 1 new safety pilot approved, dozens of workers thanked personally by Savannah for speaking up. Now, the world finally gave them a moment to breathe. The wind was cold, playful, tugging gently at the edges of her coat. She laughed softly, pressing it closed. "If the wind behaves," she said, smiling sideways at Ethan, "I might finally forgive it for that first day." He chuckled, a warm, chest-deep sound, the kind he rarely let anyone else hear. "I'm not sure I have forgiven it. It nearly scared me into dropping my briefcase. That bad," she teased. "It was." He hesitated, eyes softening as the memory filtered through. "It was unforgettable." They reached the far end of the pier, where the wood widened into a small viewing platform. Ethan leaned his elbows on the railing, and Savannah stood beside him, fingertips brushing the grain of the cool timber. For a while, they watched the quiet waves lap against the posts below. The wind tugged again, stronger this time, lifting a strand of Savannah's hair and brushing it across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear and exhaled a long, steady breath. "It's strange," she said quietly, "how everything began with one ridiculous, embarrassing moment." Ethan glanced at her, a small smile in his eyes. "It wasn't ridiculous. Oh, come on. My dress nearly flew up to my shoulders." "Yes," he agreed. "And you handled it with more grace than I would have. If it had been me, I'd have pretended to faint." Savannah laughed again, the kind of laugh she used to think she'd forgotten how to have. Light, unguarded. The breeze calmed. A lone duck cut across the water, leaving a V-shaped ripple that widened gently behind it. After a moment, Ethan spoke again, softer this time. "I used to think," he said slowly, "that the rest of my life was just going to be about maintaining things. The company, the image, the routines Emily and I built." He paused. "Losing her made me think the building part of life was over." Savannah listened, not interrupting, not leaning in too far. Just there. Ethan's voice grew quieter. "But meeting you reminded me that everything can change, even when you least expect it." Savannah felt something inside her shift, not surprise, but a tender recognition. The same truth had been forming inside her too, like a seed under winter soil. She turned slightly, watching the earnest lines around his eyes. "I thought I was too late," she admitted. "Too late for a real career. Too late to be respected. Too late to be seen." He looked at her then fully. "You were never late," he said. "You just needed a place that deserved you." A wave of emotion tightened her throat. She looked away, blinking toward the lake. "And love," she whispered, before she could stop herself. "Was I too late for that too?" Ethan's voice was gentle, almost a breath. "Only if you want to be." Savannah swallowed. The old fear flickered, the fear of losing herself, of repeating mistakes, of stepping into something she wasn't sure she could protect. She opened her mouth, searching for words, but before she could speak, a gust of wind swept across the pier. Not harsh, not cruel, just a lively, cool burst that caught her coat and hair, wrapping around her like an invitation rather than a threat. Instead of clamping her coat shut, Savannah let it open slightly. She lifted her chin, allowing the cold to brush across her cheeks, her neck, her ribs. The air was sharp but honest. It didn't hide what it was. And for the first time, she didn't hide either. Ethan didn't touch her. He didn't steady her. He didn't try to shield her from the wind or pull her close or step between her and the gust. He simply stood beside her feet, planted, face turned toward the same horizon, as if ready to face whatever weather came next, but letting her feel it first for herself. Savannah closed her eyes briefly, feeling the wind move through her, not against her. Then quietly she said, "I'm not afraid of it anymore." Ethan's voice was low, steady. "Good. Because I think life is full of gusts like that. Some knock the breath out of us. Some push us forward. Some reveal who's standing with us." Savannah opened her eyes. The lake shimmered with the dying light of the day, the surface catching streaks of gold. "And some," she said softly, "show us who we really are." They stood there together, two people who had been knocked sideways by life more than once. Two people who had rebuilt themselves carefully, fully, honestly, sharing the wind they once feared. Not holding each other, not rushing toward anything, just choosing quietly to remain. A colder gust swept across the pier, fluttering her coat again. This time, Savannah didn't reach to hold it down. She let it lift. Just a little, just enough. Sometimes healing begins where we least expect it. In the moments that embarrass us, break us open, or force us to stand still long enough to see who we've really become. Savannah spent so many years believing she was too late for respect, too late for a future, too late for love. Yet it was a humiliating gust of wind, a painful reminder of every old wound that ended up revealing the strength she'd carried all along. And beside her, she found someone who didn't try to fix her, or shield her, or rescue her, but simply stood with her while she reclaimed her voice. Life has a quiet way of showing us that dignity isn't something given by titles or perfect days. It's earned in the small choices, the moments when we keep walking, keep telling the truth, keep opening our hearts even after life has tried to close them. And sometimes the very storms we fear are the ones that clear the path we were meant to walk. Thank you for spending this time with us, for listening, for feeling, and for allowing this story to sit with you a little while. In a world that moves too fast, your presence here means more than you know. Every story we tell is a small reminder that kindness still matters, that hope still finds a way, and that every life, including yours, carries a quiet strength worth honoring. If this story touched your heart, even just for a moment, we invite you to help it reach someone else who might need that same moment. Every like, every share, and every subscribe helps us keep telling stories that touch the soul, stories that heal, connect, and remind us what it means to be human. Thank you for being here with us, truly. We'll see you in the next story.